example, you don't just study a war or all the wars, but if you understand conflict, then you can understand conflict between a husband and wife, between siblings, between two people who just had a fender bender, and global war. You can understand Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East, because there are these underlying things that are universal in all of those conflicts. So I teach that, and then they don't need to learn everything else. They can fill in the blanks because they have the structure of that meta pattern, and then they can fill in the blanks for themselves. So it's not about memorization, it's about understanding the structure of reality.
Welcome to the Lovecast with Jamal podcast. I am your host, Jamal Jabanji. I'm a best-selling author, podcaster, full-time life coach, and a communications and cultural analyst. After spending over 20 years of working with people in various stages of struggle and challenge, and after traveling to many places all around the world, visiting many different cultures, I have discovered the common roots of human suffering, along with the sustainable solutions required to help people heal and become whole and liberated. This podcast is my gift to you to serve you on your journey into healing, wholeness, and liberation. I invite you to buckle in and to settle in to each episode here on this podcast. There's something for you in each conversation. Guys, welcome back to the podcast, to the show. I'm super excited to have my guest on today. William, do you go by Will or William?
Typically Will Reusch.
Okay. Will Reusch. Okay. Will was actually on an earlier episode of this podcast. I mean, it's been, a couple years now, I would imagine, getting close to it. But Will is an amazing human being and doing some tremendous work in the world and has been for a long time. And I'm super excited that first of all, I'm excited that people like Will exist. I don't think it does it justice when we say Will's an educator of human beings. He is that. He's been an educator of human beings. But I like to think of Will, just my perception of you, Will, is that you are, you're a pioneer in the educational space. You challenge paradigms. You want to expand the paradigm of education. You're very passionate about helping set young people up for success in life. And we just need what you do, the role you have played and are continuing to play in this space, and my understanding is just so vitally important as we move into the next few years of because I in many ways, I personally feel like our society, our culture, our country is at a crossroads in so many areas, and young people are going to play a huge part in that. And so I'm just excited to have this conversation, but welcome. Thank you for coming back on the podcast. Appreciate you being here.
No, I thank you for bringing me on, Jamal. It's one of those things. I'm in a totally different world. And part of that is something that I've never had to do, which is to kind of, I guess the word would be promote, but explain what I do in a way to ensure that I can do it, which is, it's a very different thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, totally. And so since the last time you were on the show until now, I mean, you've been teaching high school civics or social studies for the last 17 years. And you have since just recently decided that you're going to retire from that profession and move beyond.
I don't know if it's retire. I think it's taking a break from the classroom to do my part to change the landscape of education. Okay. And I've given it a lot of thought for a long time, and I was in a great teaching situation, so it was one of those things where if I don't leave now, then I won't leave. And like, who knows, with the economy and the craziness of the world, that was a great idea, but I knew that it was something that if I didn't try, from the time I started my career, I was like, education system is not good. I mean, this is like right out of college. And I always said, I want to do something to change the education system. And this is my at bat.
Okay, amazing. So you've been doing this for 17 years.
Yeah, that's correct.
How would you summarize your experience? What has it been like for you? What have you learned? I know it's hard to summarize 17 years in like a few sentences, but what have you learned? What are you walking away with after 17 years in the educational space? What are you seeing?
Oh my gosh. I have had a very diverse career. Very diverse. I have taught children of billionaires and homeless kids. 17-year-old pregnant mothers of two, and little nerdy kids who have 5 patents by the time they're 11th grade. It's very interesting. It's I've taught kind of all of it in Los Angeles, but one of the worst high crime, poorest areas of Los Angeles, and one of the wealthiest, affluent areas in Los Angeles. So I've seen teenagers. I understand where they differ, what they struggle with, and also just how similar they are as well.
Amazing. And what have you seen about the educational system? I mean, what has been your aim? Because I feel like, and I'm sure you have worked with the number of teachers, right? To some people, teaching is just a job. It's just something you do. You figure out what you need to, you got to go through the curriculum, and what you have to test, and what the students have to know. But then there's some educators out there that it's not a job. I was having a conversation recently with somebody on this podcast, and he coined it. He said there's 2 different kinds of people in the world. He said there's people who are income driven, and there's people who are impact driven. And sometimes they could be in the same profession. It's just about, so my sense is that you've always been impact driven.
100%.
So what is that? Talk a little bit more about that. What is the impact that you have tried to make with your students?
I think I'm a history teacher for that whole time I taught, up until the last 2 years, or 2 years. I taught U.S. history. I've taught all layers of social studies, so geography, economics, sociology, world history, AP world history, all that, civics, government, whatever. But I'm not a history buff. I don't like dress up like a Confederate soldier and go art. I don't love history documentaries. I teach civics, and I love teaching civics, but I'm not someone who, I was the Model Congress faculty advisor, but I don't watch, congressional hearings and C-SPAN and stuff like that. I like helping young minds to figure out the world. And I use social science and social studies as my vehicle to do that.
Okay.
So I think that if you're trying to figure out how to live a good life, let's say, that's pretty basic. People want to live a good life. They don't know how. Okay, how do you do that? One way is you look at the past successes and failures of the past, from the past. So you look at what worked, what didn't, and then you follow those lessons yourself, because a lot of those lessons were hard lessons, and if you follow them, you don't have to fall into those hard lessons.
Yeah, I love that. No, that's really good way to put that.
Yeah.
So how have you been able to do that in your teaching career? How have you been able to challenge people to learn these lessons? Like, obviously it's not history for the sake of history, but there's something deeper. What I'm hearing you say is there's a deeper, you want to use social science to help students think a little bit beyond, programming. Maybe you want people to understand, like, how is it that I can live well, play my role in society well? Like, how have you been able to help students figure this out?
I think 2 things. One is I'm naturally not because I'm not like a history buff, or I wouldn't consider myself like naturally like a super high horsepower brain person. I don't have interest in this stuff. So I have to figure out what's interesting about it for me.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
as I go through that process of why, I have to teach the War of 1812. It's like, who cares about the War of 1812? Okay. I don't care about it now at 41 years old. So a 16-year-old definitely doesn't care about it. I got to find something that's really valuable about that. So I look into it. And then once I find it, then I just share that pathway with them. And what I find interesting are the useful lessons. It's not about who flanked who and who's the general. It's about like what is the meta pattern of these events. And
meta pattern.
Yes, that's all. That gets to the name of my platform. But it's getting to the crux of this, and then I just use this as an example to teach that. I think that's a big part of it. Is like the direct application in everything that I'm doing, always to the content that I'm teaching.
It's fascinating. Can you talk more about meta pattern? What is a meta pattern?
Yeah, so we know what like a pattern is, some sort of repeating sequence or something along those lines.
Okay. Yep.
A meta pattern would be how a whole bunch of patterns come together to one bigger pattern. So there could be a pattern in like a conch shell, like the Fibonacci sequence, right?
Yep.
But that same pattern is found in the galaxies. It's found in hurricanes. It's found all over the world. And I've heard it being called like God's signature. That's like an example.
It's also found at the interesting. It's found at the top of a baby's head.
Yep.
It's the same. It's so all fascinating, right?
Right. So the meta pattern is this is going on. This looks like a pattern, but then you zoom out and it's actually going like this up and down. And then you zoom out even more, and then it's the same thing over and over again. It's the way it just kind of expands out. So for a history class, for example, if you don't just study a war or all the wars, but if you understand conflict, then you can understand conflict between a husband and wife, between siblings, between two people who just had a fender bender, and global war. You can understand Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East, because there are these underlying things that are universal in all of those conflicts. So I teach that, and then they don't need to learn everything else. They can fill in the blanks because they have the structure of that meta pattern, and then they can fill in the blanks for themselves. So it's not about memorization. It's about understanding the structure of reality.
Oh, amazing. See, you're speaking my language now. We could talk about this all day. Meta pattern. So what I'm actually in the East, there's an Eastern philosophy, and if you get into like yogic ways of thinking, but there is a law called the law of correspondence. I believe that's what it was termed, the law of correspondence. And the law of correspondence says, as is above, so below. As is the atom, so is the universe. It's that these principles apply, or it's a meta pattern, right? It's you see them repeated. And I love, one of the things I'm passionate about, and one of the reasons I'm so excited and been excited to have this conversation with you, one of the things I am passionate about, and it's the thing that I just will leverage my life for, I am leveraging my life for, is peace at every level. Yeah. And I'm just fascinated with it. And
inner peace, the global peace.
Yeah. At the end of all resistance and conflict at every level. I mean, I go back to something that Jesus said one time. He said, I thought it was fascinating, in this Sermon on the Mount, but he said, blessed are the peacemakers, for these are the children of God, or these are the folks that come from whatever language you want to use. But if you want to say the source of all that is, the source of this thing we call existence is peaceful, there is no conflict or resistance at the core of this essence. And so when we operate as peacemakers, we are reflecting, we are, in my understanding, human beings are made in this image and likeness of this source, right? Of this God who is motivated, driven by, we could say love. I mean, people define that a lot of, different ways, but we say love, we can say peace. But this is why being a peacemaker has such high value for me, because now we're getting back to original intention, original source, where life really functions well and flows well. So I'm very passionate about understanding conflict as well. If conflict is a great teacher, right? There's a meta pattern we can see in that. I love it. Yeah. I'm curious though, on your end, as an educator, somebody who's studied history, who is studying or kind of looking at history as a teacher, what is a meta pattern for conflict? What have you seen?
A couple of things. I think one of them is resources. So you're fighting over resources. I think that's one.
Okay. Yep.
I think ideology is another.
Okay.
The way you see the world is just inherently different. Excuse me. And we really have two ways to work that out. There's language and there's violence.
Yep.
We either talk it out or we fight it out.
Hmm.
So we're fighting over scarce resources. Basic economics. Your wants and needs are infinite. Your resources are finite. So we have to make economic choices.
Hmm.
And those choices are going to be limited to different degrees by different entities. Certain people have a lot more choices than others. And then the other, so resources is one, and then ideologies is just, I believe this about the world. This is the map. This is my operating system. Your operating system is in direct conflict with that. I believe it's up. You believe it's down. So are we going to talk about that? Who's going to be in charge? Who are the laws going to be? Up or down? And then it comes down to who has more resources to make those decisions.
Sure.
And then it's how do we resolve that conflict? Do we talk it out? Do we talk it out peacefully? Do we yell? Do we fight? Do we fight with rules? You start with those, and then you kind of just branch out. That's just off the top of my head. That's what I would say for conflict.
Yeah, so good. So really, what I'm hearing you say, one of the main factors within conflict, of all conflict, is perception of resources, right? It is, are we coming from a place of lack, a perception of lack, or not enough?
Yeah.
Or enough, which is another question of safety, right? At the end of the day, like, do I feel safe? Do I have what I need for life? Because if the answer is no, if I don't feel safe, or if I don't feel like I have what I need, now I have an agenda, right? To kind of, to acquire or protect, which is the root of, seems to me, that's the root of a lot of conflict in the world. Totally. Okay. So perceptions of lack at the end of the day.
Yeah. I think that's definitely part, because you could say there's a drought. We had a drought here in Southern California for a bunch of years, but every time I turn on the faucet, there was water pouring, so
right,
didn't feel like a drought to me.
Yeah. Yep. 100%. Totally. What I'm curious, and this may, I don't know if this is a whole different subject here. What role, if any, did 2020 and the pandemic play in your decision to move on from education, which is what you're doing now? What role did that play? What did you see from what our society went through in 2020? Because I feel like that was a very pivotal time for all of us So what did you see in that? What did that teach you?
Yeah, great question. So, because it did directly relate to it. So it really was in a very literal way and kind of a big metaphorical way. So in the literal way, I realized that you can teach online across the screen, so teaching remotely, but there's a lot of things lacking in being able to teach online. But you can do it.
Yep.
And I figured out how to do it well. So I had to do it for, I'm in Southern California, so we did it for almost, a year and a half or something like that. So I was able to do it well. I was able to form strong bonds with my students and teach them the material well. It's like, wow, I didn't know you could really do that. So in a practical way, that was one. I was like, so maybe when I want to build my own school, it could be online. And that gets me access to people beyond just who are right in front of them.
Can I ask, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can I ask you about when you said, I'm curious, because you said I was able to do it well, the online space. What did you figure out about how to because it was a train wreck for so many people. How were you able to do it well?
I think that it's a lot of my principles that I already have of addressing kids by name. I kept up daily lunch meetings. One of the things that I do is having a lunch meeting with a different student every day.
Oh, wow.
So I was able to do that remotely. We also did stuff like I had a friend named Brittany Caldwell. I was teaching at like a predominantly white Middle Eastern school in Beverly Hills. And then I had a friend who was teaching at an all black school in Atlanta. And we were both like, yeah, this is kind of tough, blah, blah, blah. And what we did was we blended our classrooms. So we met together. We had these kids come in, and then we sent them off into Zoom rooms, two from mine, two from hers. And we just kind of gave them one prompt and we just kind of let them go. And it was really cool because a lot her kids were saying like, we've never actually had a conversation with a white person before. And then my kids were like, we've never really had a conversation with a black person before. And it was a conversation. She and I were just kind of in like the main room, just like with each other. It's like, this is kind of cool. Let's just poke our head in real quick and see what's happening and pop out. And that was something that I think didn't happen a lot, but there were so many opportunities when you're online for connection. It's how, we found each other through social media. Now, social media, I agree, is, just a dumpster fire in a lot of ways. I love John Haidt, and he's very much against it. But I talked to John Haidt, and I'm like, look, it's a powerful tool. Guns are powerful tools. Wealth is a powerful tool, but it can be used for good. I mean, you and I have never met in person, but we talked, we had great conversations. Like,
Sure.
there's something very real to this. And
Oh, for
I've
sure.
had conversations with people who live in London and Australia, and I consider them friends, even though I've never met them. So it is a social network, a social web that you can find people, and you just have to be intentional about how you use these tools. You have to use, the firearm for protection and hunting. You don't use it to juggle, whatever it is. So that's one example of how I think that I used it well.
Amazing. Okay, so I first of all never heard of a teacher using Zoom to collaborate with another teacher's classroom across
Why
the
not?
country
You know what I
and then
mean?
mingle these. That is absolutely the most creative thing I think I've heard. I don't think I've ever heard of. I've never heard of that. That's what an amazing opportunity. Like, so the pandemic forces us into this online space, and then you use it to your advantage to actually get people to start, because when you're interacting with folks who are different than you from a different perspective, it's broadening their horizons. It's expanding their views. So instead of being a liability that we have to meet online during the pandemic, it actually becomes you use it to the advantage of the students. That's fantastic. Okay, so 2020 showed you that the online space can work if done well, if done intentionally, if done creatively. It can work. What else did the pandemic show you?
Well, then on like the kind of bigger level, the societal level, was, so much about how we are not critical thinkers.
Oof.
How society punishes curiosity. How we don't, we've been strict of our ability to ask questions. We've given into authoritarian measures, top to bottom. It's the way school works. What makes a good student? The one who does what they're told. One who comes in when they're supposed to come in, sits down when they're supposed to sit down, answers the question when they're supposed to answer the question. What makes a bad student? The disobedient ones. So you build a society of people who are obedient. So when people say, you can't go to your grandmother's funeral, people go, okay. You can't spend the last moments with your mother who's sick. You go, okay. That's it. And that was really fascinating for me. And I go, wow, you know what? This is a very serious problem. I'm not saying that the people who were in charge were evil. I'm not saying that. That's where people sometimes go. Not at all. It's just they had an issue. They wanted to gain control of it somehow. Because when you're in charge, it's like, you feel like you're losing control. You got to go gain control. Makes sense. But it was very easy. And I said, we need this next generation to be willing and able and courageous enough to ask questions.
What you're saying is absolutely fascinating. I don't think I connected it to the education space till you just said that. But okay, so what I'm hearing you say, I want to make sure I'm getting this, because this is a profound point I think you're making there. The good students in a classroom setting, in the traditional educational setting, the good students are the ones that come in and respond to the authority figure. The authority figure says, sit down and accept this, sit down, take this, sit down. Okay, so the good students are obedient. The students that question, the students that say, hey, but why are we doing this? Or what about this? They're seen as being disobedient or not. So when we train young people with this value system of, you don't question, you don't ask questions, you don't challenge narratives, that this doesn't just stop when you graduate at the 12th grade level, that this goes on into a society, that in a society, then when the authority teachers, we replace teachers with government or corporations, right? That's a whole other conversation, but we replace, because they're kind of the same now. But if whoever the authority structure is that then says it, we have been conditioned wholesale as a society to not question, not be critical thinkers, which then that could take you down some dark roads depending on where we're being led.
I think it's taking us down as a society almost every deep dark road.
Can you say more about that?
Well, the darkest. I mean, It's the unwillingness or inability to, what they say, like, speak truth to power. It's just to speak up. So that's the Soviet Union. That's Maoist China. That's Nazism. That's it's within slavery. There's so many examples of people who were scared to speak up. It happened then during COVID was a lot of the stuff that was going on about race in our country, and there's a lot of questions that people had about the narratives that were going out there about race. You know, like, this is the only narrative. Why is this the only narrative? And then the fear. Now, if you speak out against, you know, Nazism or some, the Gestapo comes and gets you or something like that, you know, like, so you could be killed. People weren't getting killed. I mean, maybe a little bit, like, they weren't really getting killed for speaking out. They were just scared of being called a name. So if you're scared to be called a name, you're not going to hide Anne Frank in your attic. And what we need are people who are going to hide Anne Frank in their attic. And if you're, people think they're willing, that they would do that. You won't even risk. You're not getting hanged in the middle of the town. You're not even risk getting called a bad name on social media by strangers. That's your limit to go, okay, I'm not going to ask questions. That's it. There's not enough courage.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I can just tell you what my observation just from the pandemic is that I'm a curious person by nature. I'm curious about, even from a medical standpoint, physically, I'm like, oh, okay, so here's what I'm hearing. And then I had questions. Yeah. Questions about, well, if I do this, if I take this protocol, what happens to my body? If I do this, what happens? But nobody can answer the questions. As a matter of fact, I asked the questions. I got lumped into a group with a name, with a label. And I realized at that point, okay, historically, then the censorship, I started seeing very, very, they had a different opinion than the narrative, but some of these were physicians, some of these were scientists, some of these were political figures. Anybody who had a different narrative than the narrative that was being promoted from our authority figures were censored. And then I realized at that point, historically speaking, the ones doing the censoring, even though they meant well, like they're trying to protect misinformation from being spread, historically, those folks have never been on the side of truth. Historically.
Yeah. Right.
Because if we can have conversations, like, truth isn't really threatened by anything else. We can have these conversations if we are confident in what we're presenting. But if we're not, then we just shut it down. We shut down any other. And I saw that big time in 2020. But lack of critical thinking, right? People weren't asking the questions. I was shocked about that. I mean, I have family members. They just kind of went along with everything, and without even. And so I was just like, I would just ask a question. Yeah, but here's my question. And I would ask that question. Yeah. And it was met with almost defensiveness versus
hushing curiosity once again. Yeah, I mean, it flies in the face of so many things. Just like a specific example is the hashtag natural immunity was censored on social media. But that's something that we knew, flu, chickenpox, like we just know that. So why is that? Yep. And then you go, well, what is it? Like, what is that? And if you start following it down, it's not that crazy. The reasons why, I don't think it would make sense that it comes down to people in positions of power trying to raise their corporate shareholder values and stuff. Like, I don't think it's that like, conspiracy theory, but the problem is we don't know. And where ambiguities exist, assumptions are made.
Yep. Totally.
So a bunch of assumptions were made and we didn't know, we couldn't get answers to it. So people started spiraling off, and then people get, they don't have their guardrails about what's true or not. And then they lose trust in the media because the media says things that aren't true. They say this medicine is this when it's actually that. And it's so clearly that you just one Google search away. It's just one Wikipedia article away, So people go, all right, well, then I can't trust media. I can't trust, whatever channels and magazines and newspapers. And then we get into a really dangerous situation. So how many times does your best friend have to betray your trust before you don't trust them for a long time? Maybe like 2 or 3 times. They have to lie to your face. They lie to your face 2 or 3 times. You don't trust them for years.
Right.
And that's 100%. Your best friend. So let alone some media company. So they lied, and then they lied again, And then people just go, all right, well, I'm not going to trust them at all. Then where do you get your information from? The person who's telling you what I want to hear.
Yes. And that's a problem in itself as well.
Yes.
Today's episode is sponsored by Free to Love Corporate Solutions. Did you know that any company or organization is only as competent, capable, and responsive as its workforce? And did you also know that, nationally speaking, it's been estimated that stress costs companies up to $150 billion, B with a billion, $150 billion in lost productivity every single year? What if your company and your place of work could actually be a source of healing and transformation for its workforce? Well, believe it or not, there is a growing community of conscious companies and businesses that see it as their mission to be a place of healing and transformation, not just for the products that they're offering to the wider world, but also they really desire that their place of employment would be a culture of healing and transformation for the workforce itself. And I've had the opportunity to work with a number of small businesses that are just doing fantastic work in the world. And I would like you to hear from the founder and CEO of a company that is striving to make a difference, not only in the world, but also in the people that work for the company.
I own a real estate brokerage, BRA Realty, here in Pennsylvania, and we have about 110 realtors. Jamal came out a few weeks back and did a training in replace of one of our regular trainings, and the feedback was phenomenal. Really stuck with me was he created a space of safety for a conversation of transformation to take place, where not just did agents walk away with great tips and insight about what's driving them, but also the ability for them to actually take the time and work on themselves in that session, specifically around getting clear on what matters most to them, and to the point where we had multiple agents that were actually crying. I had multiple agents come up to me afterwards just saying it was one of the best trainings we've ever done, and that we should have Jamal back once a month. So just to give you a quick shout out, Jamal, you did an amazing job. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for your ongoing coaching with myself. I've been working with you now for over 3 months and have had really, really great results. I intend to stick with it, as there's always room for growth, and having someone like you in my corner has been really helpful. So I appreciate everything you do, and thanks for being you.
So if you're a small business owner, maybe you're on the executive team, you're a founder, a CEO, or even if you're just in management of some level at a company or in a corporate culture where you oversee people at any capacity, and if you're interested in having a conversation where we may be able to explore how our program can assist you, can assist your company, and assist your workforce, I'd love to have a conversation with you about that possibility. All you have to do is go to my website, jamaljavanji.com/corporate solutions. Again, that's jamaljavanji.com/corporate solutions. You'll be able to fill out a form there, and we will get back with you and set up a time to have a conversation with you about how we can assist you in transforming your company.
Sure is.
Fascinating. And again, I think we could boil it all down to and I think you're doing a great job of this, of really pinpointing. We're not critical thinkers. We're not trained to think critically.
Right.
One of the things I do want to touch on here before we move forward in the conversation, because I think this is something that you make a great point at. And, people fall prey to what's called conspiracy theories because we're not taught to think. Correct. But like, we're not taught to have this natural curiosity.
Yes.
And we punish curiosity by labeling it as conspiracy theory or conspiracy theorist. But one of the things I think that you said that I'd love to get if you'd expound upon is, it's not a conspiracy to understand a basic reality that corporations are interested, and it's very natural. If you start a business, if you're a corporation at some level, you are naturally interested in profit. You're naturally interested in maximizing shareholder profit, right? This is natural. This is not a stretch to think this way. So when corporations, that's their bottom line. So everything is kind of, all the information and everything they're doing is coming through the grid of maximizing corporate profit. So if you make weapons, that's what you do. If your corporate entity makes weapons of war, then it is in your interest to increase that.
Sure.
Right? Because it's about the corporate, your shareholders and your bottom line needs to grow. If you make medications, pharmaceuticals, whatever they may be, you're, by very default, it's not conscious. It doesn't even need to be conscious. Unconsciously, I've heard somebody put it this way: the bottom line of any entity is its own survival.
Yes.
If it's a company, if it's so you want to propagate yourself. So be it weapons maker, be it pharmaceutical. By the way, two are the biggest corporate entities in the world is weapons manufacturing and pharmaceuticals. Yeah. Which is fascinating when you look at it. But so the corporate interest at those two levels is to advance itself. So if government has been captured, and somebody who's running for president now uses this term a lot. I think it was RFK Jr. He calls it corporate capture, and he always talks about corporate capture. But if some agencies, government agencies, have been captured by these corporations, it's not a stretch to think that the aim then of these government corporation, because now I think the idea of fascism is that this line has been blurred, right, between the state and corporate interests. They've kind of a marriage between corporate and state, which is traditionally what fascism, my understanding of what it is. So the aim of corporate capture of government entities is to advance itself through more weapons, more drugs. It's kind of what we're seeing here. But
absolutely.
But people aren't questioning that because we're not taught to think critically.
Yeah, so we're not questioning. We're it's almost like Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. We're just so distracted by what's going on with the Kardashians, Tom Brady, and Taylor Swift and stuff. It's like circus and bread. Keep us distracted. I mean, the idea of conspiracy theory. Conspiracy is just a bunch of people working together for some sort of like nefarious, goals, and then theory is just a hypothesis. So if you go, I think maybe this group is working together for something that's a little shady. That's a conspiracy theory. Like it's just a hypothesis, so challenge it. And then you talk about like regulatory capture. Like if you have a corporation, you want to raise shareholder value. If you have access, you're an individual. If I had the governor's number in my phone, and I build Patterdox,
right?
Will I go, hey, can you like just get this out to a whole bunch of homeschoolers and put this in this and talk about it online? Like I'm gonna do that to look out for myself because I'm not because I'm evil, because I deeply believe in it. And people have these ideologies that they deeply believe in. And then the corporation has this thing of raise shareholder value. That's kind of their ideology. So they're going to use whatever means they have. And as they grow more resources, they're going to use those resources to do that. People have morals, but corporations don't. And individuals will just act as like a part of the cog. That's why these corporations are so big. I'm familiar with Hannah Arendt wrote a book called Banality of Evil after the Nazi, the Nuremberg trials. And it was just like, I didn't kill Jews. I just ran a train schedule, man.
Wow.
It's like, I just drove a truck.
Yes.
I didn't kill any Jews.
Jeez.
I just opened a door. And so these corporations employ millions of people sometimes. I don't know, hundreds of thousands of people, thousands of people. Okay. And everyone is just kind of like, well, it's not me. It's not me all the way up to the top. And at the top, it's like, I got 12,000 families that I am responsible for. And that is a tremendous weight on my shoulders. So I'm going to do what I need to do to feed those families. And that's the way they see it. And we can critique that and judge that all day. But I think that we tell ourselves these stories where we're the hero of our own story, not the villain of our own story. And we all do that. And that's going to grow back into this entity that is built on an infinite growth model. You hit the best quarter ever for your stock price. They don't go, all right, let's rest for a little bit. Let's stay right here for a year or two. No. What, you just won? You just hit the biggest jackpot ever? You got to do better next quarter. How? Figure it out.
Man, there is so much in what you're saying here. I love how you kind of put it in context of like, oh, in Nazi Germany, right? There was this, yeah, no, I just opened the door. I didn't kill any Jews. I was just doing my role, because when you are when you are not, I think at some level, and this is kind of what in my work, what I'm passionate about and working with the folks I work with as a coach, I really want to help people go a little deeper and ask the question of who am I? What is true about me? What's the essence of me? Because if you don't know that, then what happens is you just operate from this survival based kind of program. We're programmed by society to just survive and to get along and to just kind of like get along in the sense of like, just make it, you know? So if you're not aware of the truth of who you are at the core level and operating from this essence based truth of reality, then what happens is, because you just want to survive, it's just like, well, I'm not really asking questions about what the corporation's doing. This is just my job. I'm just opening the door. I'm just doing this thing. You know, it could be that your corporation is taking Jews and sending them to a camp, but we're not even thinking about that. So we're just, and I tell you where I saw this is really interesting. I saw a fascinating documentary, a true story. It was called The Compassionate Spy.
Oh.
And it was about this scientist, in World War II era, working for the United States. And he was a part of the operation. What was the operation where they created the Manhattan Project? But it was also where they're creating the nuclear bomb, the first nuclear bomb that they dropped on Japan. And he was a part of this, and he was his job, and he was just a part of the corporate nature of it. He was very well educated, this paid well, that he was recruited. He went to work at Los Alamos. He helped develop the nuclear bomb that they eventually dropped on Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he said when they dropped it and the incineration of the city and hundreds of thousands of people were like melted, like literally just destroyed. And he said there was cheering. This is in the United States here in these offices. He said, when it was successful, there was cheering and jubilation amongst, he said, my colleagues. And he did it. He was a part of it.
Yeah.
And it something jolted him. It like shook him deeply to his core. And he said, how did I just do this? How did I actually, like, I just leveraged the best years of my life to create this thing. And it was like a epiphany. And he's just a very well-educated, obviously brilliant person who was not even aware of what he was doing until that moment that the bomb went off. And then he said he was horrified. There was his humanity, his essence, his truth came awake in that moment. And he realized, what have I done? And then he realized, and then of course he's high security clearance. He's a privy to a lot of conversations and a lot of planning at the military level. And he realized that this was then seen as, we're going to take this and spread it. We are going to do this to the Soviet Union when the war's over. And it was actively planning to use the nuclear weapons on the Soviet Union to subjugate them, because they were the next threat after Nazi, and they was already seen. So he realized this, and he said the only way we can save the world is to get the nuclear, because the United States was the only one with nuclear weapons, to get the secrets of how to make a nuclear weapon to the hands of the Soviets. And he did. And he was a part of a scheme he was a spy. It was called a compassionate spy. And they asked him, and he kept it secret. Him and his wife knew. They kept it secret. And he asked his wife, he said, when I pass, and if you're still living, please share this. Please tell my story. And she did. They made this documentary. He passed, and his wife was still living, and she participated. And she said he wants the world to know why he did this. He got away with it.
The Rosenbergs didn't. They were executed for it. And there were a lot of people involved in that. But wow.
And he talked about them. It's powerful. But he basically said, they said, why did you do this? And he starts weeping. He said, because I had this. He goes, we saved the world. We saved the world by doing this, because we were going to be the next we were going to be the next Hitlers, exterminating massive amounts of humanity. It was so jolting to me to hear that documentary. Yeah. But it's a picture of like, what happens if you don't think critically? You become part of the masses that do this.
And I think I would even challenge him. I think that he was probably so caught up in hearing this stuff and maybe just heard certain conversation, not others. And it was so secret that he probably didn't cross-reference and challenge that as well, because I think there'd be a lot of people that would say that was not our intention. We do not have the same kind of murderistic, I don't know that's a word, drive that like the Nazis would have if they got the bomb, that we would have been the people, we're the most powerful military entity on the planet, and we do terrible things, for sure. And who would you rather have be the strongest military power in the world? What country would you rather have with the military might that we have? I think that if there's one God on the planet, there's someone, and all human beings are flawed because Jesus isn't here anymore. So who do you give that gun to? And if there's 12 people, you give it to the least maniacal. Yeah. And I do think that America, as with all of our flaws, I do think that we're the least maniacal.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting, and I think this is what he brought out in the documentary, is he said that is what he actually heard the planning. So under normal circumstances, human beings are, I would say, are peaceful by nature. Oh, yeah. But people have to be jolted out of their, when they're taught to be afraid or to feel that there's some injustice happening. This is how you capture and justify. So there were people, and Kennedy, JFK talks about this in 1961 when he took office. He was being heavily pressured, and he was this close. This is before even the Cuban Missile Crisis. He talks about this very openly. He said that his generals were actually come to him with an entire plan of a nuclear first strike. Like it was imminent. They said, you must strike the Soviet Union with nuclear weapons. And he said, well, what if we do this? Will they respond? And he said, well, yeah, they're going to retaliate. And he said, then what are the implications of this if they retaliate? Of course, they had the nuclear weapons. Yeah. And he said, well, we're talking about how many millions of Americans, forget about other people, but how many millions of Americans would be wiped off the face of the earth in a matter of seconds. Sure. And they came up with something like 30 million, 40, I don't know. I'd have to listen to it again to get the number, but it was massive. Massive cities would be obliterated. And Kennedy said, and why are we doing this again? He said, because if we don't strike first, they're going to strike us first. So it was this under fear, right? Human beings will then justify. Yeah. So he actually saw through it. And he said, finally, he talked to his brother, Bobby, who was the RFK's dad, and he was the attorney general at the time. And his brother snapped him out of it because he was actually going to do it. He was contemplating doing it. Nuclear first strike, which had been the end of the world as we know it. He was this close from it. And his brother said, these are madmen. These are American generals. He said, they're madmen. You can't do this. And finally, he came awake and he was like, you're right. There's no way. This is unacceptable. So he came back and told them, no, we're not going to do this. And at that point, everything, there became an adversarial kind of relationship with the military, what's called the military industrial complex. Yeah. But I say all that to say that human beings, I don't think Americans inherently are any better or worse than Nazi Germany. But Nazi Germany, you think about the Germans, these were educated folks. These were human beings, Christian even. Yeah. At their how did they fall into this? Right? Because there was this lack of critical thinking, they were operating from deficit, they had went through an economic downturn. They were afraid, the Treaty of Versailles, World War I, they had decimated the economy, and they were susceptible to this kind of survival-based thinking, which is the same thinking that the generals were trying to propose to JFK as to justify a nuclear first strike. And the only reason JFK didn't do it is because the Soviet Union had nuclear weapons. Had they not had nuclear weapons, he might have done it. And the only reason that they had nuclear weapons is because somebody gave it to them to balance so it's just fascinating when you get into it. I mean, that's a whole other probably subject, but I'm curious. So here's where I'm fascinated because it doesn't really matter what the subject is. What matters to me is critical thinking, to be able to question narratives. Yeah. Tell me about what you're doing now. Like what led you to end your traditional career as an educator, and what are you doing now? And what are you excited about? What's your new vision here?
Very exciting. Yeah. There's so many things you were talking about. Like about that, like that important leadership and stuff. But yeah, so now, so what I'm doing is I have been successful by every kind of metric from being a classroom teacher. As far as being a teacher goes, so not a millionaire, but I felt, and this is maybe a goofy way, maybe it comes off wrong, but essentially, I felt like I was having this massive impact on so many young lives. So many, though, was about 70, maybe
Okay.
100.
Oh, interesting.
Depends how many students. Okay. This was the nature of the school I was at and stuff like that. Shouldn't I have that impact on more? How? It was also just one community in one area of Los Angeles. And if I go and I open up my own school, then it's just one other area, one thing. And I want it to be universal. I want it to be out and available to as many people as possible. How do you do that? What do you teach? How much time do you really need to be in the classroom? Do you need to be there 5 days a week? 5 days a week, for an hour a day each class? Or can you, if you're focusing on the meta patterns, you can do it significantly less. Opens up more time for other things, more time off of screens, more time out of, just like the like how much wasted time is in a given class period at a given school. I think a lot. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about how you go to any school in the country, Jamal. You go in and you say, who's the best teacher at this school? They go, oh, Miss Jackson. Miss Jackson's the best, right? And everyone says Miss Jackson, okay? And then you go, who's the worst? Oh, whatever. Mr. Bowen. Okay, so Mr. Bowen and Miss Jackson get paid the same benefits. Kids don't get a choice in most schools whether they get Miss Jackson or Mr. Bowen. The choice is gone. So there are all these problems with the education system, all of them. Geography, access to great teachers and not just the teacher, all of these different problems. Critical thinking, supporting curiosity, all of these problems. And I just went through and I built something that I believe solves all of those problems. At least it will in time. The model is that it will in time, and I have to start somewhere. And then as it grows exponentially, and then it will become something that I think is an option. It's not for everybody. I'm not for everybody. I'm not everyone's flavor. It's fine. But I want to be available for as many people as possible. Yeah, so it's called Patterdox. Again, docs being belief, pattern being like there's patterns in the world. So there's a belief that the world is made up of a whole bunch of patterns. If we study those patterns, then we will understand the world better. It's a social science supplemental curriculum. So I'm not getting into the elements of credits and getting into college, anything like that. Like you'll get into college if you're a good thinker, if you're valuable. Okay. So it's supplemental. It's in addition to traditional school, homeschool curriculum. There's a U.S. history class, starts September 2nd. There's an American civics class, the rights and responsibilities of being a citizen, starts September 2nd. And then I have a sociology class where we study basic sociology. That's aligned with the Simpsons television show. So you study why people do what they do in sociology, and then you watch episodes on your own of The Simpsons, and you fill out a viewing guide that applies the lessons that we just learned into these specific episodes. And then over the summer now, I'm onboarding kids to have just like a critical thinking boot camp where we talk about different issues, and we do Socratic seminars, and we basically just like kind of get the feel for how to get the creative basis for how critical thinking works, and say some of the neurochemistry and stuff like that. So that's where it's at. That's where it's starting. That's what I'm going to do. Next school year, I'm going to be teaching the U.S. history and the civics class with blend of recorded and live sessions. It has to be live. I have to know who my students are. I have to meet with the families and meet with the students, because I am going to cater it to you. It's you as an individual. You're not just a number. You're not just another person at this line of desks and this line of lockers. You're an individual. I want to know who you are, and then I can cater this to you. And the model is to keep that scaling.
I'm speechless. That's amazing. So You're talking about, so what I've heard you say is in your desire to reach more students, because in the traditional educational setting, you're reaching about 70 students a year, if that. But this is a desire to impact more young people. This is not a different school. You're not asking, this is not a substitute for the educational system, but this is a supplement. It's like it's a supplemental. If parents or students want to develop beyond the traditional education limits of the traditional educational model, they can register for it's called
Patterdox.
Patterdox. Okay. Patterdox is the name of this curriculum.
Yeah, sir.
Patterdox. So with Patterdox, there's going to be courses. There's going to be, history courses. There's going to be critical thinking seminars. There's going to be very creative ways to get people to become critical thinkers, to ask questions, to see the patterns, so that people can be prepared for life beyond education. That's amazing. Absolutely incredible. And because you're operating beyond, it transcends the traditional educational model. You have more ability and freedom to devote the time and energy to really challenging these paradigms and helping people think beyond the boxes that our traditional educational system is programming us to think in. Is that correct?
That's the idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely brilliant. How long have you been sitting on this?
I've been working it out for almost 2 years.
Wow.
But now it's the reality of doing it, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
It
is.
Building.
The software is all built. I've onboarded some families already. This is for people who understand this value, how important this is. And I would love people in your audience to still want to call. It's not for everybody, but it might be for you.
Is this okay? Is this for like a traditional high school student age bracket wise? What are the
teenagers? So it's going to be anywhere from 13, 14 up to 17, 18.
Okay, so between 13, 17, 18, like we're talking about high school range. If a student is interested in really going beyond the limits of traditional education, if a parent is listening to this, if you're passionate about your kids becoming critical thinkers,
I got them.
This beautiful, and it doesn't hurt to just at least inquire and kind of get a sense of it. So Patterdox, and it launches in the fall. Is that correct?
The official classes launch in the fall. The U.S. history and the American civics class, which are both written by me and taught, instructed by me. But there's also recorded elements because people have different schedules and things like that. And everything that I do live will also be recorded. So it's going to be an ever-growing library and stuff. And right now, the sociology class is available with The Simpsons right now. And the summer boot camp is going on right now, where we bring people on. I'm getting to know the students right now. I literally just opened it up a few weeks ago, two weeks ago. Yeah.
First of all, I'm jealous because when I was in high school, I had a real tough time. I had a lot of problems going on in high school, and it was one teacher who was a history teacher who kicked my brother. I had an older half brother. He kicked him out of class, and my brother needed it to graduate. So he kicked my brother was he had a lot of issues too. So he kicked my brother out of class, but then he comes over. It was a kind of a tough public school, high school, not a good school, not a good reputation. This guy shows up at our house unannounced, which is not teachers didn't do this. He shows up at about 5 o'clock in the evening, knocks on our door. And I remember opening the door and I knew who he was. I was like, his name was Mr. Spittler. And he was like, Mr. Spittler, what's he? I was like, how does he even know where we live? And he says, your parents here? And my parents come to the door and he says, I just wanted to let you know that I removed your son from class and he cannot come back to class unless a few things are rectified. And I was watching in the background, I was listening to this. And I was like, who, first of all, he didn't have to come over, but he did. Mm-hmm. And he explained why. And he had this reputation for being serious but really there was something about that example. I don't know what it was. I decided next year, I was like, I'm taking him. He's going to be my history teacher. I don't know why. I thought maybe he would judge me. Maybe he'd see me in that line. I remember I showed up for class and this guy, there was something different about him. And he said, he looked at me and no judgment. And he said, I want to welcome you all here. He said, this is not an easy class. This is going to require you to be this is going to require all your participation. He said, here's the deal. Like, we have to cover certain things by law curriculum. He said, I could go over this book. It's really boring. If you want that, I guess I can do that. If you choose something different, I could, however, teach you what I find to be interesting. He said, I don't expect you to find it interesting. It's interesting to me. But if you want me to teach you what I find interesting, let me know up front in the beginning. You choose what this class is going to be. It could be boring in textbook, or it could be the things I think are fun and interesting. And the class was like, I was like, who is this? And and the class voted, and we're like, no, teach us what you want to teach us.
Yeah.
Best class I've ever had.
Of course.
It awoken something in me.
Everyone deserves that teacher, man.
Oh, that's exactly what I'm saying. You know, and he was rare. Like, he was like unheard of.
I know.
I have a daughter. She's grown up now. If I wish she was a teenager now, because I would be enrolling her in what you're offering, because it should not be an exception to the rule. It needs to be the rule, right? Because I would not be doing what I'm doing today in the role I'm in today if it wasn't for that one teacher who brought his passion and helped us think and ask questions. And that's what he did. He would challenge narratives.
Yeah.
In the class, I couldn't be who I am today without that teacher. And to think that that's not the majority, that's not the norm. So I say all that to say, how do we get, where can people discover this program? How can people look into it a little more? If you're listening to this, if you're part of the audience and you have teenagers, just do me a favor. I would encourage you. It doesn't cost, it doesn't hurt you to investigate this program a little bit further. We're not getting a kickback. There's nothing about this here, right? But this is, to me, the future of our society, future of our nation. We must become, this is that big. We have to become critical thinkers so that we can shape the world, not react to the world and be governed by it, but we can actually create it the way we need to create it. I'm not pushing
my beliefs on him.
Nope.
Yeah. Stop. This isn't about me.
Yeah.
It's not about pushing my beliefs.
Yep.
You know? It's called Patterdox, Patterdox. So Patterdox.com. If you want to, I think just go to Patterdox.com would be the best bet. But also my Instagram. If you message me on Instagram, we can connect and set an appointment. I want to connect with you before you would even buy it. Like, I want to know if it's a good fit. I don't want to grab your cash. That's not what I'm in this for. You said about impact. It's like, is this a good fit for you or not? So let's talk. Let's see if this is a good fit for your child, for your family, because it involves the families too. You know, it's one person becomes a critical thinker in the family. It's not going to work. It's going to cause a lot of conflict.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. You know, I do the same thing with my coaching work. It's not about grabbing the cash. It's about, is this a good fit? Is this going to serve you? Yeah. And that's what's important. I love that. That's your approach. So Patterdox.com, we'll put it in the show notes so that it's there so people can check it out.
Yep.
So at Will Reusch, REUSCH on Instagram. People can find you there. That's fantastic. Anyway, I could talk to you all day. I really could.
Yeah, I know. I was
It's so good, so important. Thank you for doing what you're doing. I know you're in the beginnings of this this new endeavor, and I know it can feel daunting, but it's just one day at a time. You know, it's just one day at a time.
Yeah,
totally. And it, you know, the impact will. Like I said, I had that conversation about the difference between income driven and impact driven. And this guy, he said impact driven is like, it's the thing that it's so big, it even sounds foolish. When you try to talk about
this
it's like, this is so much bigger than me or this thing I'm doing. This is massive, but that's how you know, right? It's coming from the source because it's so much bigger. You know, I equate it to like civil rights, right? Like, think about MLK Jr.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Civil rights is like, MLK Jr. as a human being. He's one person. He died, right? It cost him his life. But the dimension of civil rights is so big that it goes beyond this one individual person. And so this guy I was talking to, he said, you know, income-driven life is the thing that pays you. The income-driven life. It's the thing that supports you, helps you live. The impact-driven life it's the thing that you will go broke doing. It's the thing you will leverage everything for because it's that big. And that's
Yeah.
what this is. That's
It
what you're
is.
talking about. You're going to
Yeah,
leverage
gave up
everything.
a very comfortable job. I gave up, they did not want me to leave. Everyone there wanted me to stay. And then I gave up a comfortable job, that comfortable salary, because of that. It's a little mad, but I believe in it. And I know I can do it because I've been doing it for so many. I have just piles and piles of letters and stuff from former students. It's incredible. I'm very, very blessed.
So Patterdox is so much bigger, right? It's not about Patterdox. Patterdox is the tool that's going to change a nation. That's going to be a part of changing a society to creating peace on earth. I know it may sound so ridiculous, but like peace on earth, literally, is what we're talking about. The end of conflict, seeing the patterns, changing a country.
Sir,
it's where I cannot think of things that are better things to give your life for to go broke. If we want to use that word, I don't think you're going to go broke, but it's just that idea of like, I'm leveraging everything for this.
Absolutely.
So good.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks for doing what you're doing. And I'd love to keep this conversation going.
Please.
But we'll get all this information in the show notes. And if you're listening to this, check out patterdox.com. The link will be in the show notes. But if you have kids in this age bracket, they're worth it. They're worth at least looking into it. So good. Awesome. Thank you, Will.
Thank you.
Take care. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for listening all the way through to the end of this podcast episode. When you show up and you receive the gift that was for you in this episode, it not only benefits you, it benefits all those that you love and the wider world around us. This work that you're doing, the hunger that you have, it's so important, and I commend you for tuning in and being open. If this podcast has been a blessing to you, then I would ask that you do something to give back to this episode, to give back to this podcast. One of the things that you can do, and it's cost-free, very easy, and is super helpful, is if you'll just go to iTunes and rate and review this podcast on iTunes. Also, if you'll go to Spotify, if you listen on Spotify, go to Spotify and rate and review this podcast on Spotify. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. It makes a huge difference in the algorithm, and it helps people find our show. Thank you again for being here. And until next time, take care.